Oh, holy Christ, Jordan muttered. Are we back to that again? Because on TV, the jury says whatever the hell the script tells them to. Real life is considerably less certain. A floating skull grinned out from the picture, bone white and gleaming. A painfully blue sky streaked with clouds showing through the holes of the eye sockets. A realistic red tongue snaked out from between yellowed teeth. At the bottom, Emily had signed her name and titled it Self-Portrait. He raised a finger and pushed aside the short barrel. You don't ever wave a pistol at someone like that, he said in a strangled voice. It could have just gone off. Emily flushed, but I didn't cock it yet. Did I know that? He sank down on the ground, his head on his knees, a puddle of limbs and muscle. Holy Christ, he breathed. Emily looked down at her fingers, still clasped around the gun, now as comfortably warm as the hand of an old friend. I'm so nervous right now. It's been a really long time. Long time no see, fam. I went through a really, really hard 2 years, almost 2 years now. And coming back to, so I started this book club at a time in my life when, like, right before things got very, very dark. And basically, I had to quit the book club because I was just trying to survive. And it's been, I don't know, I think I've almost been avoiding coming back and, like, finishing it. I'm not going to cry right now. I've been avoiding coming back and finishing it because it just I think I'm afraid to, like, even think about that time in my life. Like, I've just been, like, putting it out of my memory and, like, blocking it out. I'm not even wanting to think about the last, like, what happened to me at the end of 2022 is one of the most traumatic things I've ever gone through in my entire fucking life. But anyways, so I'm gonna finish this book club series. I'm gonna do it. I'm so sorry for quitting, like, and just kind of, like, you know, dipping out on you all. But again, I was literally just trying to survive. That's all I can say about that. So I'm back. I am pushing myself to do this today because I was like, you know what, like, I can't put it off forever. So that's what I'm doing here now. We're gonna pick back up where we left off in the book club series. It has been a year since my last video, and I've been doing a lot of self-work and just trying to get my mental health back to a place of stability, I guess. So yeah, our last reading was, I think it was reading 16. And so let me do my intro real quick. Hello, welcome back to another episode of this. And in this episode, it's our book club series. So if you don't know who I am, my name is Brooke. I do all types of different content on my channel, but this right here is a continuation of a book club series that I started and am now picking back up after taking a break because I went through something very traumatic in my life. Yeah, so anyways, I'm picking back up where I left off a year ago. This book club series, basically we read chapters of the book together, and then we talk about the characters and the drama and the different perspectives and the theories about what we think might happen. So if you enjoy book clubs and book club discussions, then you might enjoy this, so stick around. I hope that you do. The book is called The Pact by Jodi Picoult, and we are at reading number 16. So if you enjoy book clubs and book discussions and character discussions and drama and all that fun stuff, then I hope that you'll stick around. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. For those of you who did start in the beginning with me, let me go back real quick. Let me just rewind. If you want to, let me just say, so I just had to spend time cringing at myself because I had to go back and look at my last video and figure out where we left off in this book club series, right? So I had to watch my last video of myself, and I was just cringing so hard. Ugh. But anyways, so if you want to cringe and go back and watch all of the videos, like all of the book club series videos in order so that you can get caught up with what's going on, I do have a playlist here on my channel. It's called Book Club Series The Pact, and you can watch all those videos in order. You can also search the hashtag on my channel, hashtag Book Club Series, and all the videos will come up. If you're just dying to get caught up and cringe really hard like I did. Also, one more thing I want to say. So like I used to do a couple videos of reading and then a discussion video. What I'm going to do now to make it easier for all of us is I'm just going to do the discussion in the video like while I'm reading. So we're going to read a little bit, we're going to pause, we're going to discuss, and then we're going to jump back in and read a little bit more and then pause and then discuss. I'm going to read like I usually do. If you're new here, I usually like just to get everybody on the same page, I will read like a little excerpt from where we left off last time to make sure that everybody's like caught up to speed on where we were at so that we can all, know what's going on. This is where we ended last time. So Emily and then her boyfriend, what is her boyfriend's name? God, it's been a year. I'm so sorry. Chris. Her boyfriend's name is Chris. We're at a flashback right now to when Emily was still alive. And her and Chris so she's pregnant, but Chris doesn't know at this time that what I'm about to read, this flashback that I'm about to read. She's pregnant. Chris doesn't know it. She hasn't told anybody. They are together hanging out at the ocean or the lake or something. The lake. They're together. It's at night. They're hanging out at the lake because they're boyfriend, girlfriend. They be doing stuff. You do as one does with their lover. So they're at the lake at night, chilling. She's got all this on her mind. I'm pregnant and nobody knows, and I don't want to be with this man. I love him, but I don't want to be with him romantically because she's like feeling like he's more of a brother to her, but she doesn't want to say that because everybody in her life expects her to be with him forever and marry him and all this other stuff. So now on top of all that pressure, and she already didn't want to be with him for the rest of her life, but was already afraid to tell everybody. Now she's got his baby in her belly and she hasn't told anyone. So she's got like this mounting pressure is going on in her head right now. And again, Chris has no idea, as men usually don't. Sorry men, we still love you. But anyways, so Chris has no idea because she's keeping all this to herself. And we're picking up right now where they are together, the two of them hanging out at the lake at night. Emily blinked at the surface of the lake, rippling deep and ringed with the sounds of crickets. She imagined how easy it would be to walk into that lake, her feet slipping along the silty bottom until the black water covered her head and weighted down her lungs, sinking her like a stone. She felt Chris walk up behind her and gently slip his arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" "Drowning," she said softly. Walking in there until it was over my head. Very peaceful." "Jesus," Chris said, clearly startled. "I don't think it would be peaceful at all. I think you'd start thrashing around and try to get to the surface." "You would," Emily said, "because you're a swimmer." "And you?" She turned in his arms and laid her head on his chest. I would just let go," she said. So that's where we left last time. And now, let's see. So we're moving on to the next section. This is a different point in time, I guess. Hold on. But it's still like, Emily's still alive, so it's next section. Moving on to the next section. I don't need to overanalyze it for all of us, right? Let me just fucking move on. Perhaps it would have gone well, but the physician scheduled the day of Emily's abortion was a man. Am I allowed to say the A word on the YT that you do? Am I allowed to say abortion? I'm gonna bleep that out, maybe. I'm not sure. Okay. Perhaps it would have gone well, but the physician scheduled the day of Emily's abortion was a man. She lay on the gurney, her legs bent up and revealing Stephanie beside her. She watched the doctor enter and turned to the sink to wash. The soap slipped between his fingers, greasy and white, exaggerating the size and shape of him. The soap slipped between his fingers, greasy and white, exaggerating the size and shape of him. He turned around and smiled at Emily. Well, he said, what have we got here? Well, what have we got here? She's thinking. Then he reached under the gown, just like the other had, after saying that same awful thing, and slid his fingers into her. Emily began to kick, her ankles knocking aside the stirrups, her foot striking the doctor on the side of the head as he cautiously backed away. "Don't touch me," she yelled, trying to sit up, curling her hands between her legs and tucking the gown beneath her thighs. She felt Stephanie's hand on her shoulder and turned her face into the counselor's arm. So Stephanie, I guess, is the counselor. "Don't let him touch me," she whispered. Oh, I guess I should whisper that. "Don't let him touch me," she whispered, even after the physician left the room. Stephanie waited until Emily stopped crying, then sat down on the doctor's stool. "Maybe," she suggested, "it's time to tell the father." She would not tell Chris, especially not now, because as soon as she did, she would have to tell him about this horrible abortion and the doctor and why she couldn't stand to have that man touching her. Because if you are caught up, then you know she has a past with a traumatic past with sexual assault as a child. So that's where this is coming from. I'm not going to get into it because, again, if you want to get caught up to speed, you can go back and watch the playlist. It's called Book Club Series The Pact. Get caught up. But anyways, she has a traumatic past with sexual assault when she was a child, from when she was a child. And so when she says, or when she thinks, and why she couldn't stand to have Chris, oh wait, hold on. She would not tell Chris, especially not now, because as soon as she did, she would have to tell him about this horrible abortion and the doctor and why she couldn't stand to have the man touching her and why she couldn't stand to have Chris touch her. So that's what she's talking about, like when she's thinking that's why she can't stand to have these men touching her because of that trauma. And why she was not the girl that Chris thought she was. So she's got all this shame, as women do, unfortunately, when they have a past, like, of trauma and things like that, because we've been made to feel like it's our fault, which is fucking not. But anyways, moving on. And why she was not the girl Chris thought she was. As soon as she told him, she'd have made her own bed, and she would have to lie in it with him. Eventually, too, she would have to tell her parents, and they'd stare at her in shock. Their little girl? Her fault because she was having sex now when she shouldn't. Her fault because she attracted that disgusting man's attention when she was still so young. So she's, again, referencing in her mind back to when she says, because she attracted that disgusting man's attention when she was still so young. So she feels like it's her fault, like, that she attracted his attention to it's her fault that this adult man chose to sexually assault her when she was a child. We really need to move past this whole blaming girls and women when they get assaulted. It's incredibly fucked up. And it's not ever your fault. It's not. The way an adult chooses to conduct themselves should never, ever be put on on the child. Ever. It's never. Never. We cannot blame children for the way the adults choose to act, period. Children do stupid shit. And it should be a known thing, like, you're the adult in the situation, and you need to fucking act like it. Everyone would find out soon enough anyway. She was well and neatly trapped, with only one small and hidden exit, so dark and buried that most people never even considered breaching its hatch. She's talking about, like, that's the exit that she's thinking about right now. I'm trying not to go off on a tangent, but again, the discussion now is going to be within the video, so I probably am going to pause a lot and, like, give my 2 cents on things. Emily listened to Stephanie, her options counselor, talking and talking for over an hour. Amazing, considering there really were no options at all. All right, moving on to the next section. "Can you pass the butter?" Melanie asked, and Michael handed it to her. "This is good," Michael said, pointing to his dinner. "Em, honey, you ought to try the chicken." So So Melanie and Michael are Emily's parents, the girl. Honey, you ought to try the chicken. So I guess they're all sitting at the dinner table together right now. Melanie, the mom, Michael, the dad, and, and her dad's trying to encourage her to eat, I guess, while she's probably not in the mood. Emily pressed her fingers to her temples. I'm not that hungry, she said. Melanie and Michael exchanged a glance. You haven't eaten anything all day, Melanie said. How do you know? Emily shot back. I could have polished off a whole banquet at school. You weren't there. She bowed her head. I need a Tylenol, she murmured. Did you see the application from Sorbonne? Melanie said. It came with today's mail. Emily's fork clattered against her plate. I'm not going. What's the harm in applying? Melanie said. She smiled at Emily across the table, clearly misreading her reluctance. Chris will be just where you left him. Chris will be just where you left him. Let me just redo that part, sorry. Chris will be just where you left him when you get home, she teased. Emily shook her head. So she's going crazy inside, right? Because, Emily, back to the main character here, or one of the main characters, the pregnant girl, right? All these people in her life think that, she wants to spend the rest of her life with him, that she's, romantically attracted to him, that she wants to be with him forever. When, in her mind, she sees him, as we found out in earlier videos, earlier readings, she sees him as a brother because they've been together their whole lives and their families have been best friends their whole lives, so they've always been around each other. And, she can't get past is just seeing him as a brother. It's weird. It's just this weird dynamic, whatever the word is, going on. And nobody knows about it. So they just keep saying shit like, Chris will be just where you left him when you get home, she teased. Her mom teased. Emily shook her head, her hair flying. Is that what you think this is? That I can't live without him? She tamped down the question that burned at the base of her throat. Could she? Throwing her napkin on top of her plate, she stood. Just leave me alone, she cried, running out of the room. Melanie and Michael stared at each other. Then Michael cut a slice of chicken and placed it in his mouth and chewed it. Just like a man, sorry. Well, he said, it's the age, Melanie agreed, and reached for her knife. Don't you just love parents? It's the age. She's fine. She's fine. She's not having suicidal thoughts at all. It's the age. Next section. There was a clearing down the class 4 road. I guess that's 4. I'm not good at Roman numerals, sorry, but I think it's class 4. There was a clearing down the class 4 road that ran behind the Heart and Gold properties where people left off old stoves and refrigerators, bags of thick glass bottles, and rusted tin cans. For lack of a better word, it was known in Bridgebane as the dump and had served for several years as a field for target practice. Chris four-wheeled into the clearing and left Emily sitting on the hood of the Jeep while he set up a gallery of bottles and cans 30 yards away. He loaded the Colt revolver, batting away the flies that buzzed in the sweet, tall grass around the Jeep's tires. Chris snapped the chamber back into place as Emily leaned down to pluck one green stalk and threaded it between her front teeth. He took a Kleenex from his pocket and wadded small balls of it into his ears, then handed it to Emily. Plugs, he said, pointing, urging her to do the same. He had just lifted the revolver, braced in both his hands, when he heard Emily's shout. Wait! You can't just shoot, she said. You have to tell me what you're aiming for. Chris grinned. Oh, right. So that I can look bad when I miss, he squinted, shutting one eye, and raised the Colt again. Blue Label. I think it's just an apple juice jug. The first shot was deafeningly loud. I gotta move, sorry. I gotta readjust. Okay. Alright. Okay. Blue Label. I think think it's an apple juice jug. The first shot was deafeningly loud, and in spite of the tissue, Emily clapped in her hands over her ears. The first shot was deafeningly loud, and in spite of the tissue, Emily clapped in her hands over her ears. She didn't see where it went exactly, but the trees behind the targets rustled. The second shot hit the blue labeled bottle dead on, the glass exploding against the rough bark of trees. Emily hopped off the hood of the car. "I want to try," she said. Chris pulled the Kleenex from his ear. "What?" "I want to try." "You what?" He shook his head. "You hate guns. You tell me all the time you don't want me to hunt." "You use a rifle, and they're too big," Emily pointed out, staring at the revolver curiously, her eyes slightly narrowed. "This looks different." She sidled closer and touched her hand to Chris's. "So can I?" Chris nodded, wrapping her hands around the gun. She was surprised at how heavy it was, for such a little thing, and how unnatural her palms felt molded to its sleek, cool curves. "Like this," Chris said, coming up behind her. He showed her the bead on the barrel, explained sighting a target. He showed her the bead on the barrel and explained sighting a target. She would not let him know she was sweating. Her hands slipped a bit on the metal as Chris raised them, still covered by his, to the level at which she should brace herself to shoot. "Wait," Emily cried, pivoting out of Chris's embrace so that she faced him with the gun. "How do I—" His face had gone white. Gingerly, he raised a finger and pushed aside the short barrel. "You don't ever wave a pistol at someone like that," he said in a strangled voice. "It could have just gone off." Emily flushed. "But I didn't cock it yet." "Did I know that?" He sank down on the ground, his head on his knees, a puddle of limbs and muscle. "Holy Christ," he breathed. Chagrined, Emily lifted the revolver again, braced her legs, pulled back the hammer, and fired. A tin can sang and spun, lifting into the air and hanging there for a moment before tumbling to the ground. Emily herself had jerked backward with the recoil and would have fallen if Chris hadn't scrambled to his feet to steady her. "Wow," he said, genuinely impressed. "I'm in love with Annie Oakley." "Beginner's luck," she said, but she was willing, but she was smiling, and her cheeks were red with pleasure. Emily looked down at her fingers, still clasped around the gun, now as comfortably warm as the hand of an old friend. Some shit's about to happen. Some shit's about to go down. We're moving on to the next section now. It was damp in the Jeep, the heater fogging the windows and creating a sticky, tropical humidity. "What would you do?" Emily said softly, sitting back against Chris, "if things didn't work out the way you planned?" She felt him frown. "You mean like if I didn't get into a good college?" "Like if you didn't even go to college. If your parents died in a car accident and you had to take care of Kate all of a sudden." He exhaled softly, stirring her hair. "I don't know. I guess I'd try to make the best of it. Maybe go to college later on." "Why?" "You think your parents would be disappointed in you for not becoming what they thought you'd be?" Chris smiled. "My parents would be dead," he reminded her, so the shock of it couldn't hurt them too badly. He shifted so that he faced her, propped on an elbow. "And I don't really care what anyone else thinks, except for you, of course. Would you be disappointed?" She took a deep breath. "What if I was? What if I didn't want to be with you anymore?" This is the first time she said that to him. "Well then," Chris said lightly, "I'd probably myself." So he's joking. He kissed her forehead, smoothing a crease. So he's like, "Well then," Chris said lightly, "I'd probably kill myself." He kissed her forehead, smoothing a crease. Why are we talking about this anyway? He curled forward, unlatching the rear door of the Jeep so that it flew open, exposing a night spread with stars. Indian summer was gone, and the air smelled crisp and thin, full of the tang of wild crab apples and the hint of an early frost. Emily drew it into her lungs and held it there, the sharpness itching at her nostrils, before her breath burst out in a small white cloud. "It's cold," she said. I don't know why I said it like that. "It's cold," she said, burrowing closer. It's beautiful, Chris whispered. Like you. That would be hard to break up with, wouldn't it? He touched her face and kissed her deeply, as if he meant to drain away her sorrow. Their lips separated with a faint ripping sound. I'm not beautiful, Emily said. You are to me. Chris drew her between his bent legs, her back to his chest, and wrapped his arms around her ribs. The sky seemed rich and heavy, and the moment was suddenly full of 1,000 teeny things which Emily knew she would always remember. The tickle of Chris's hair against the back of her neck, the seal-smooth callus on the inside of his middle finger, the parking lights of the Jeep, casting a blood-red shadow over the grass. Chris nuzzled her shoulder. Did you read the science chapter yet? How romantic, Emily laughed. Chris grinned. It is, kind of. It says how a star is just an explosion that happens billions of years ago, and the light's just reaching us now. Emily squinted at the sky, considering. And here I thought it was something to wish on. Chris smiled. I think you can do that too. You first, Emily said. He tightened his arms around her shoulders, and she felt the familiar sensation of wearing Chris's own skin, like a cloak of heat or a barrier for protection, maybe even a second self. I wish that things could stay like this, like now, forever, he said softly. Emily turned in his arms, afraid to hope, even more afraid to let this opportunity slip by. Her head was canted at an angle so that she could not quite look at Chris in the eye, but could make her words fall onto his lips. Her head was canted at an angle so that she could not quite look Chris in the eye, but could make her words fall onto his lips. Maybe, she said. They can. Okay. So now we're back to now. Now. Okay. Christmas, 1997. Heart to control. Oh, shit. So, he's back in jail. So, for those, little background here. Chris is in jail, in the now, in the present, because we'll just do a little recap real quick. Emily is dead. I'm not going to go into how or why, but she's dead, because if you want to know, you can go back again, watch the previous videos. You don't have to watch all of them. Literally, just watch the last, 2 videos, and you'll be caught up. Trust me, you'll be fine. But anyways, so Emily's dead, and in the present, in the now, in the Christmas 1997, I guess. I hope that's right. I guess we'll find out here in a second. But anyways, and Chris is on trial for her murder. And that's all we really know. We don't know any details about if he's guilty or if he's not. Nothing has been revealed. But right now, just know that Chris is in jail and he's awaiting trial for Emily's murder, his girlfriend, or his former girlfriend. Heart to control. Chris looked up from the book he was reading and rolled out of his bunk, studiously ignoring one of his cellmates, Bernard, who was sitting on his own bunk, cracking ice between his teeth. The officers brought ice once a day and set it in a cooler in the common room, where it was supposed to last well into the night. Unfortunately, Bernard managed to siphon most of it away before the other inmates even noticed that it had arrived. He walked down the catwalk to the locked door at the end of the medium security unit, where he waited until one of the officers hovering at the control booth noticed his face. Visitor, the officer told him, unlocking the door and waiting for Chris to take a step forward. His mother had tearfully informed Chris the last time she'd come that she'd be unable to make it on Saturday, since Kate's dance recital fell at the exact same time. Chris had told her, of course, that he understood, although he was jealous as hell. Kate had their mother 7 days a week. Couldn't she give up one lousy hour? At the door of the basement, an officer was waiting. There you go, he said, pointing to Chris in the direction. Pointing Chris... Sorry, hold on, I know this is inappropriate. There you go, he said, pointing Chris in the direction of the table farthest away. For a moment, Chris stood motionless. The visitor was not his mother. It was not even his father, which would have been enough of a shock. It was Michael Gold. All right, pause. We're going to pause here. Discussion for a second. just to kind of recap. So Michael Gold is Emily's dad, who at this time is now dead. Emily's dead. And Michael is her father. And again, Chris is in jail awaiting trial for Emily's murder. And this is her dad coming to visit Chris, the boyfriend. Sorry. And this is her dad coming to visit Chris while he's in jail. Emily's dad coming to visit Chris while Chris is in jail. It was Michael Gold. Chris took a wooden step and then another, mechanically bringing himself towards Emily's father. Is that camera too high? He took some courage from the fact that the same officers who kept him from escaping were also there to protect him. Chris, Michael said, nodding towards the chair. Chris knew that he had the right to refuse a visitor. Before he could speak, however, Michael sighed. I don't blame you, he said. If I were you, I would have hightailed it upstairs the minute you saw my face. Chris sat down slowly. The lesser of two evils, he said. A shadow passed across Michael's features. Is it that bad here, then? It's a fucking party, Chris said bitterly. What did you expect? Michael blushed. I just meant, well, compared to the alternative. He looked into his lap for a second and then raised his head. If things had gone the way you planned, you wouldn't be here. You'd be dead. Chris's hands, drumming on the tabletop, stilled. He was wise enough to know an olive branch when he saw one, and unless he was mistaken, Michael Gold had just admitted that, in spite of whatever garbage the prosecution was dishing up, he believed Chris's story. Even though it wasn't the truth. Okay, so that was like Chris's own thought, you know. Like, so Chris's story is that, well, I don't want to give it all away if you haven't, like, caught up. But basically, Chris's story is that they were supposed to themselves together. Like, it was a suicide pact that Chris and Emily had together, that they were both supposed to do it. But his story is that, I don't remember exactly. If you want to know exactly, go back and watch like the last 2 or 3 videos. I'm sure you don't have to watch like the whole playlist, but just go back, maybe watch the last 3 videos just to kind of catch up. And I'm sure that I've explained it in those as well, because I always over explain. But anyway, so Chris's story, I think, was that he didn't have time to himself, I think, before the cops got there to like save them, but Emily was already gone at that point. Something like that. But anyways, all right, so his thought. So he says, so yeah, Michael's like, I just meant, well, compared to the alternative. And by alternative, he means like Chris wouldn't be here anymore. He looked into his lap for a second and then raised his head. If things had gone the way you had planned, you wouldn't be here. You'd be dead. And this is Michael Gold saying this to Chris. Chris's hands, drumming on the tabletop, stilled. He was wise enough to know an olive branch when he saw one. And unless he was mistaken, Michael Gold had just admitted that, in spite of whatever garbage the prosecution was dishing up, he believed Chris's story. Even though it wasn't the truth. Dun dun dun. We don't know the truth, by the way. We don't know the truth yet. How come you're here? Chris asked. Michael rolled his shoulders, one at a time. I've been asking myself that question the whole drive out here. I've been wondering. He turned his frank gaze onto Chris. I don't really know, he said. What do you think? I think you're spying for the AG, Chris said. Not so much because he believed it, but because he wanted to see the reaction on Michael's face. God, no, Michael said, stunned. Do they have spies? Chris scuffed his sneaker on the floor. I wouldn't put it past them, he said. The whole point is to lock me away, right? To keep me from killing a whole string of girls like I did to Em. Michael shook his head. I don't believe that. Don't believe what? Chris asked, his voice growing louder. That the Attorney General doesn't plan to throw away the key, or that I didn't kill her. You didn't. Michael said, his eyes tearing. You didn't kill her. Chris found his throat too tight to speak. He scraped his chair along the floor, wondering what the hell had ever made him sit down in the first place. What had made him think that he had anything to discuss with Emily's father? Michael stared at the table, running his thumb along the battered edge. The reason I came, he began, is because I wanted to ask you something. It's just that we didn't see it. Melanie and I, we didn't know Emily was upset, but you did. You must have. And what I was wondering is, he paused, glanced up. How did I miss it? He whispered. What did she say when I wasn't listening? So he's talking about how Emily was depressed and having these thoughts. And Michael, her dad, is saying to Chris that basically that he feels guilty because he didn't see it. What did she say when I wasn't listening? Chris swore softly and rose, intending to escape, but Michael gripped his arm. Chris swung toward him, eyes burning. What? He said roughly. What do you want me to say to you? Michael swallowed. That you loved her, he said thickly. That you miss her. He pinched his fingers into the corners of his eyes, fighting for composure. Melanie's not... Well, I can't speak about Emily to her. But I thought... He looked away. I don't know what I thought. Chris rested his elbows on the table and buried his face in his hands. He couldn't promise Michael Gold anything. Then again, if the man wanted to talk about Emily, you couldn't get better than Chris for a captive audience. Because he's in jail. Someone will find out you came, he warned. You shouldn't be here, you know. Michael hesitated. No, he said finally, but neither should you. Okay, next section. Gus pushed her shopping cart absently through the aisles of Caldor, amazed that her family, which was no longer by any means ordinary, would still cling to the trappings of the mundane, needing shampoo and toothpaste and toilet paper just like any other. Gus, by the way, is Chris's mom. So, Chris who's in jail, right? Gus is his mom. So, she's looking through the aisles at the grocery store, like, thinking about her life and how dumb it is that she's in the grocery store buying toothpaste while her son's on trial for murder, basically. She's like, this is a fucking joke. All right. Needing shampoo and toothpaste and toilet paper just like any other. Driven to shopping out of desperation, she wandered through the big store, sometimes so engrossed in her thoughts that she passed the Kleenex without putting any into her cart. Oh my God, what? Sometimes so engrossed in her thoughts that she passed the Kleenex without putting any in her cart. That she stared blankly at cat food for minutes, although they had never owned a cat. She wound up in the sporting goods section, idly passing shiny bicycles and rollerblades until she stopped short, arrested by the display of the hunting and fishing area. Buffeted by huge camouflage print raincoats and blaze orange vests, she examined the small items on the pegboard, Hops solvent number 9, and gauze cleaning patches and bluing, fox urine, doe estrus, things that she could not believe were sold to the public, but that never failed to make her husband smile when he found them in his Christmas stockings or Easter basket. She stared at a picture of a hunter taking aim and realized that she didn't want James ever to pick up a gun again. If he had never purchased the antique Colt, if he had never purchased the antique Colt, would this have happened? Gus sank down on the metal shelf that edged the floor of the pegboard. She took deep breaths, her head between her knees, and with her ears ringing, she did not hear the approaching cart until it nicked the edge of her shoe. So she's at the store. We're just going to say Walmart because I don't know where the fuck she's at, but she's in like the hunting gear. And she just kind of breaks down, like looking at all this hunting stuff. And she's like thinking to herself, if her husband didn't have this gun, would any of this have ever happened. And she's just like got her head like in her, between her knees, and she just like fell to the ground, I guess, whatever. So her cart gets nicked by we don't know who yet. Oh, she said, her head snapping up at the moment. Another voice said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." Melanie's voice. Gus stared. So Melanie is Emily's mom, and they used to be best friends. So Gus and Melanie, the two moms of the boyfriend and girlfriend, used to be best friends. They were best friends like their whole lives. Well, the kids' whole lives. And they're running into each other now at the store while Gus's son is on trial for murder of Emily's daughter. Okay. So we're all up to speed here. Gus stared at the tight lines of her face. At Melanie's face. The dulled skin. The anger that made her seem several inches taller than she actually was. Melanie drew the cart across the aisle. "You know," she said softly, "I'm not sorry after all." Because she realized that it was Gus that she bumped into. She pushed her wagon away. Wagon? I've never heard that one. I say buggy, but I've also heard cart. I usually hear cart. I grew up saying buggy. I usually hear cart. Never heard it called a wagon in my life. Have y'all ever heard that? Have y'all ever heard wagon for buggy or grocery cart? Never heard that one. Anyways, she pushed her wagon away. Leaving her own cart in the middle of the aisle, Gus ran after her. She touched Melanie's arm, only to have the woman swing around, her eyes filled with a cold, banked rage. "Go away," she bit out. Gus remembered what it had been like when she first met Melanie, how they would sit and hold their hands over their bellies, knowing that the other understood the ripple and hum of a stretching child. The quiver at the fingertips and nape and nipples that came late in the pregnancy. The quiver at the fingertips and nape and nipples that came late in the pregnancy when you had given your body up to someone else. What she wanted to say to Melanie was, "You aren't the only one who is hurt. You aren't the only one who lost a person that you love." In fact, when it came down to it, Melanie grieved for one person, whereas Gus grieved for two. She had lost Emily, and she'd also lost her best friend. Okay, so Gus is saying so Gus obviously and, Chris's family loved Emily just as much. They were all like one big family. Okay, so Gus is thinking in her head that she had lost Emily, right? Because they all lost Emily. But also that she'd lost her best friend, which is Melanie. Because now Melanie, basically hates her because she thinks that her son, Gus's son, killed Melanie's daughter, her daughter. I hope that makes sense. Whatever. She had lost Emily, and she'd lost her best friend. "Please," Gus finally managed, her throat working. "Just talk to me." Melanie abandoned her cart and headed out of the store. Next section. All of a sudden, Jordan stood up from the cramped table in the small conference room and yanked hard on the window sash, gritting it open. It was lined on the outside with bars, of course, but a cooling breeze threaded into the room. Chris leaned into it, smiled. "You trying to help me break out of here?" Jordan, in case you forgot, is Chris's lawyer. And it's from what I can tell here, he's visiting him in jail. Let's see. Jordan stood up from the cramped table in the small conference room and yanked hard on the window sash, gritting it open. It was lined on the outside with bars, of course, but a cooling breeze threaded into the room. Chris leaned into it, smiled. "You trying to help me break out of here?" "All right, so..." "No," Jordan said. "I'm trying to keep us from suffocating." He wiped his sleeve across his forehead. "I'd love to see the heating bills for this place." Chris laced his hands over his stomach. "You get used to it." Jordan looked up briefly. "I imagine you have to," he said, and then spread his hands on a stack of papers. They had been going over the discovery from the Attorney General's office for 3 hours. It was the longest continuous stretch that Chris had ever spent away from his cell. He waited for Jordan to ask him another question, absently reading the names on the spines of the New Hampshire statute books arranged on a metal cart for the convenience of the visiting counselors. Jordan had told him almost immediately after arriving this morning that his defense strategy would be based on a double suicide that had not been carried through to its end. He had also told Chris that he would not be taking the stand in his own defense. It was the only way, Jordan insisted, to win the case. How come, Chris said for the second time, on TV the defendant always takes the stand? Oh, holy Christ, Jordan muttered. Are we back to that again? Because on TV the jury says whatever the hell the script tells them to. Real life is considerably less certain. Chris's lips thinned. I told you that I wasn't suicidal. Exactly. That's why you won't be on the stand. I can say whatever I want to at the trial to get you acquitted, but you can't. If I put you on the stand, you have to tell the jury that you were never going to kill yourself. And that weakens the defense. But it's the truth, Chris said. Jordan pinched the bridge of his nose. It's not the truth, Chris. There is no one truth. There's only what happened based on how you perceive it. If I don't put you on the stand, all I'm doing is giving my idea of how I perceive what happened. I'm just not asking for yours. It's a lie of omission, Chris pointed out. Jordan snorted. Since when did you become a good Catholic? He asked. He leaned back in his chair. I'm not going to go around and around on this, he said. You want to go on the stand and do it your way? Fine. First thing the prosecutor is going to do is hold up the police interviews and show the jury how you've already changed your story once. Then she'll ask you how come, if you were going to save Emily, you brought a gun with bullets in it, instead of an empty revolver for show. And then the jury will hand back a guilty verdict, and I'll be the first one to wish you well at the state penitentiary. Chris muttered something under his breath and stood up, facing the rear wall of the conference room. According to the ballistics report, Jordan said, ignoring him, the shell of the one bullet that was fired was still in the revolver chamber, along with that second bullet. Your fingertips were on both, which is a good piece of evidence for us. Why put two bullets in the chamber unless you were planning on one for yourself? I also like the fact that her fingerprints are on the gun along with yours. Yeah, but they only found her fingerprints on the barrel, Chris said, reading over Jordan's shoulder. Doesn't matter. All we have to do is cast a reasonable doubt. Emily's fingerprints are somewhere on that gun. Therefore, she held it at some point. He spread his hands. You sound confident, Chris said. Would you rather I wasn't? Chris sank down in his chair. It's just that there's an awful lot of evidence there to explain away. There is, Jordan briskly agreed. And all it does is place you at the scene of the crime, something you've never denied. It does not, however, prove what you were doing there. He smiled at Chris. Relax. I've won cases with far less to go on than this one. Jordan opened up the medical examiner's report with the details of Emily's autopsy. Entranced, Chris reached out and twisted the folder, reading the distinguishing marks of her body that he could have cataloged himself, the measure of her lungs, the color of her brain. He did not have to read the careful number to know the weight of Emily's heart. He'd held it for years. Are you left-handed or right-handed? Jordan asked. Left, Chris said. Why? Jordan shook his head. Trajectory of the bullet, he said. What about Emily? Right-handed. Jordan sighed. Well, that's consistent with the evidence, he said. He continued to leaf through the records that had been sent by the prosecutor's office. You had sex before she killed herself, Jordan stated. Chris reddened. Yes, he said. Once? He felt his cheeks burning even hotter. Yeah? Straight intercourse? Or did she go down on you? That would be so awkward, having to give those details. Let's just sidebar here for a second. So you're like, you're having to give the details of your making love with your girlfriend to your attorney. Like, in, I guess, a conference room at the jail. Just think how awkward that is. Okay. Anyways, straight intercourse, or did she go down on you? Like you're talking about, like, fucking politics or something. You know what I mean? It's like you're talking, it's just awkward. Chris ducked his head. Do you really need to know this? Yes, Jordan said evenly. I do. Chris picked at the nick in the table. Just straight, he murmured. He watched his attorney flip through the autopsy report. What else does it say? Jordan exhaled through his nose. Not enough of what we need. He stared at Chris. Is there any physical condition you know of that could have accounted for Emily's depression? Sorry, if I lower my voice when I say the word depression or suicide, it's because I don't want to get flagged on the YT. Okay. Is there any physical condition that you know of that could have accounted for Emily's depression? Like what? Like some kind of hormonal imbalance? Cancer? Chris shook his head twice. What about the pregnancy? For a moment, all the air in the room thickened. The what? Chris said. He was aware of Jordan watching his face carefully. Pregnancy, Jordan said, turning the autopsy report towards Chris again. 11 weeks. He didn't know, remember y'all, he didn't know. Chris's mouth opened and closed. She was, oh God. Oh God, I didn't, my battery died. But we're back. So Chris has just found out that Emily was pregnant, and he didn't know. Oh God, I didn't know. He thought of Emily as he had last seen her, lying on her side, blood spreading beneath her, her hand draped over her abdomen. And then the room went black, and he imagined that he was falling into place beside her. Next section. Usually a visit to the jail's nurse costs $3, but apparently fainting in the middle of a meeting with one's attorney won an inmate high triage status and a free trip to the small room used for medical treatment. So he passed out. He finds out Emily's pregnant, or was pregnant, when she, or well, we don't know if she did or not. Point is, when she died, she was pregnant. Chris just found this out in jail with his attorney, and he passed the fuck out. Now he's like at the medical room. Chris awakened to the feeling of cool hands on his brow. Are you all right? A voice said, high-pitched and muted, as if through a tunnel. He tried to sit up, but the hands were surprisingly strong. After a moment, he took deep breaths and tried to focus. His eyes seized upon the face of an angel. The nurses rotated, on loan from the old folks' home next door. Chris knew of certain inmates who'd fill out the request for a medical visit and pay the $3 just to see whether they'd get Nurse Carlisle, hands down the hottest of the three women. You passed out, Nurse Carlisle said to him now. Just keep your feet up, yes, like that, and you'll be fine in a few minutes. He kept his feet up, but turned his head on the scratchy pillow so that he could watch Nurse Carlisle move with economical grace around the small closet that passed for a sick room. She returned with a glass of water filled with, oh God, precious ice. Drink this slowly, she said, and he did, slipping the small cubes into his mouth the moment she turned away. Have you fainted before? Nurse Carlisle asked, her back to him. And he almost said no, until he remembered the night that Emily had died. Once, he said. Well, I've been in those little conference rooms, the nurse confided. I'm surprised anyone makes it through without fainting, given the heat. Yeah, Chris said. That must have been it. But now that she had mentioned the conference room, it was all coming back. The discovery he'd been going over with Jordan. The small black letters that made up Emily's autopsy report. The baby. He felt himself sinking back down on the table, and almost immediately the nurse was at his side. Are you feeling sick again? She asked, propping his feet up again. Do you have kids? Chris asked thickly. No, the nurse laughed. Why, am I acting like a mother? She tucked the blanket in at his sides. Do you? No, Chris answered. No, I don't. His hands fisted on the fabric. You stay here as long as you want, Nurse Carlisle said. Don't worry about the officers. I'll let them know what's happened. What had happened? Chris wasn't even certain he knew anymore. Emily? Pregnant? He had no doubt that the baby was his. He knew this in the way that he knew that the sun would go down that night and the sky would be blue the next morning. A fact that had always been that way and would always continue to be. He squinched shut his eyes and tried to remember whether her stomach had been any less flat, whether her features had seemed different, whether the truth had always been there for the taking. But all he could seem to recall was Emily, drawing away from him every time he touched her. Maybe Jordan had been right. The pregnancy had been the thing that made her so depressed. But why? They could have gotten married and had the baby. They could have gone together for the abortion. Oh shit, so he would have been okay with it. They could have gotten married and had the baby. And then he's like, they could have gone together for an abortion. So this is him thinking. This is like, I guess, Chris's internal dialogue right now. Surely, she would have known that they'd figure it out together. Unless that was exactly what she was afraid of. All of a sudden, a powerful rage shuddered through Chris. How dare she depend on him for the one thing, but not the other? One thing, but not the other. With great precision, Chris rolled to his side and put his fist through the plasterboard wall. So he's pissed. Next section. Selena sat on a high stool, waiting for Kim Kinley to finish rinsing her hands. I'm trying to remember, but I'm pretty sure Selena is the assistant to Chris's attorney. I think. She let her eyes roam about the classroom, taking in the wide, black tables and the wall of shelving that held a rainbow of construction paper, a brace of easels, a festival of paints. The art teacher wiped her palms on the front of her denim apron and turned toward Selena with smile on her face. Now, she said, briskly pulling up a stool, what can I do for you? Selena opened her notebook. I'd like you to tell me about Emily Gold. So yes, Selena is the attorney's assistant for Chris. So Chris's attorney's assistant is Selena. So, Selena, with a smile on her face. Now, she said, briskly pulling up a stool, the art teacher. What can I do for you? Selena opened her notebook. I'd like you to tell me about Emily Gold. She said, I understood she was one of your students. Kim smiled wistfully. She was, a particular favorite. I've heard that she was very artistic. Selena prodded. Oh yes, she designed the Thespian Club's stage sets, you know. And she won a statewide high school art contest last year. With her grades, we had discussed her going to a college of fine arts, or even off to the Sorbonne. We're gonna just pause here for a second because I don't know what the fuck. I'm just gonna be honest. I don't know what the Sorbonne is, so I'm gonna have to look it up because I can't stand it. We're gonna Google this, find out together what the Sorbonne is, because it must be a school of some kind. Maybe it's like a fine arts school or something. What is Sorbonne? Prestigious educational institution in Paris, France, that is home to several internationally renowned higher education institutions and research centers. So I guess it's like a network of higher education institutions. So I don't know if it's like has something to do with fine arts, but that's what we're going to roll with. I discussed her going to a college of fine arts or even off to the Sorbonne. Now that was interesting. Pressure could come from many angles, not only parental, to make a kid feel overwhelmed. Did you ever sense that Emily was worried about living up to everyone's expectations? The art teacher frowned. I don't know if anyone was harder on Emily than herself, she said. Many artistic personalities have a wide streak of perfectionism. Selena sat back, patiently waiting for Kim to explain. So I guess Kim is the art teacher. Well, maybe a case in point would be best, she said. She stood up and rummaged in the back of the room, emerging with a medium-sized canvas painted with the spitting image of Chris. Emily Gold had been better than good. She was an accomplished painter. Oh, Kim said. That's right. You'd know Chris. Do you? She shrugged. A bit. I have every high school student for some small block of time in ninth grade. The interested ones sign up for continuing art classes. The others beat a path to the door. She smiled ruefully. Chris would have been among the first ones out, if not for Emily. He took art classes too, then. Oh, God, no. But he came here quite a lot during his free periods to pose for Emily. She lifted a hand toward the canvas. This was one of many. Were you always here with them? Most of the time. I was impressed by the maturity of their relationship. In my line of work, you see a lot of giggling and necking in the halls, but rarely the connection those two had. Can you explain that? She tapped her finger against her lips. I guess the best example would be Chris himself. He's an athlete, always in motion. Yet, he thought nothing of sitting perfectly still for hours just because it was something Emily asked of him. She lifted the canvas, preparing to put it away, and then remembered why she'd brought it out in the first place. Oh, the perfectionism. See here? She peered closer to the canvas, and Selena did too, but only made out the layered shadings of paint. Emily must have reworked the hands 6 or 7 times over a period of months. She said she couldn't get them exact. I remember that Chris, who was getting awfully sick of modeling at that point, told her that it wasn't supposed to be a photograph. But you see, it was to Emily. If she couldn't capture a portrait the way it was in her own mind's eye, it wasn't acceptable. Kim slid the canvas behind some others. That's why I have it, she said. Emily wouldn't take it home. In fact, I'd seen her destroy some others that didn't work out precisely the way she'd wanted, slashing the canvases or painting over them entirely. And I couldn't let that happen to this one, so I hid it and told her one of the custodians had misplaced it. Selena penciled a note in her little book, then looked up at the art teacher again. Emily was suicide, she said. I wonder if she'd seemed depressed to you over the past few months, if there was any change in her behavior at all. She never said anything to me, Kim admitted. She really never said much of anything at all. She'd come right in and get down to business. But her style had changed, she said. I thought it was just experimentation. Can you show me? Emily's most recent work was propped beside an easel near the big window of the art room. You saw her painting of Chris, Kim said, by way of explanation. This last canvas was washed with a red and black background. A floating skull grinned out from the picture, bone white and gleaming, a painfully blue sky streaked with clouds showing through the holes of the eye sockets. A realistic red tongue snaked out from between yellowed teeth. At the bottom, Emily had signed her name and titled it Self-Portrait. Red and black background, floating skull, bone white and gleaming, blue sky streaked with clouds showing through the holes of the eye sockets, a realistic red tongue snaked out from between yellowed teeth. Self-portrait. Okay, I'm trying to find a good spot to end. So I'm gonna keep going for a little bit. Jordan's cleaning woman, like the 6 before her, finally got sick of dusting and vacuuming around heaps of papers that were absolutely, positively not to be disturbed, and quit. Well, actually, she'd quit a month ago, but that was just when Chris's case arrived on his doorstep and he'd put it out of his mind entirely. Until that evening, when he'd been leafing through his notes while reclining on the bed and realized that the smell which wouldn't go away came from his own sheets. Sighing, Jordan hiked himself off the bed and carefully set his notes on the dresser. Then he stripped the sheets from the mattress, wadding them into a ball and heading toward the washing machine. It was only when he passed Thomas. So Thomas is Jordan's son. And again, Jordan is Chris's attorney. Thomas is Jordan's son. And I think he's like a preteen or something. I don't remember exactly. I think he's like 12 or 13. I'm not sure. Well, I'm sure that maybe they'll say it again. Okay. It was only when he passed Thomas doing his homework in front of Wheel of Fortune that he realized he probably ought to get his son's sheets too. All in all, if Maria hadn't quit, Jordan might never have found the penthouse. As it was, when it tumbled into the tangle of sheets, all he could do was stare at it, stunned. Finally, he shook himself into motion and picked up the magazine. Emblazoned on the front was a woman whose breasts defied gravity. Her privates shielded by a low-hanging pair of binoculars. Jordan rubbed his hand along his jaw and sighed. He was completely at a loss when it came to this part of fatherhood. How could he tell his son to get rid of a porno magazine when he himself paraded in bimbo after bimbo? If you were going to have this conversation, he told himself, you might as well have Thomas listen. Tucking the magazine beneath his arm, Jordan walked into the family room. Hi, he said, sinking down on the couch. Thomas crouched over the coffee table, a textbook spread in front of him. What are you working on? Social studies, Thomas said. And before Jordan could stop himself, he thought, a little too social. He watched his son write in his 3-ring binder, his left hand carefully printing so that the pencil would not smudge. Left-handedness. Thomas had gotten that from Deborah, and also the thick black hair and the shape of the eyes. But the promised breadth of his shoulders and the long line of spine, all that was straight from Jordan himself. Apparently, he'd also bequeathed his son a healthy lust. Sighing, he pulled the magazine out and threw it over the loose-leaf paper. Want to tell me about this? He asked. Thomas flicked a glance at the cover. Not really, he said. Is it yours? Thomas rocked back on his heels. Seeing as how only you and I live here, and you know it's not yours, then I guess that's pretty obvious. Jordan laughed. You've been hanging around lawyers too long, he said. Then he sobered, capturing Thomas's gaze. How come? He asked simply. Thomas shrugged. I wanted to see it, that's all. I wanted to know what it was like. Jordan glanced at the binocular babe on the magazine cover. Well, I can tell you, it's not really like that. He bit his lip. In fact, I can tell you anything you feel like asking me. Thomas blushed, the color of a peony. Okay, then, he said. How come you don't have a girlfriend? Jordan's mouth gaped. A what? You know, Dad, a steady girlfriend, a woman who actually sleeps with you and then comes back. This is not about me, Jordan said tightly, wondering why it was so much easier to keep control in front of strangers at a trial. We're talking about how you came to have a penthouse in your possession. Maybe that's what you're talking about, Thomas shrugged. I'm not. You said I could ask you anything, but you won't answer me. I didn't mean about my private life. Why the hell not? Thomas exclaimed. So I wonder if he's older then. Because he seems like, I don't know, it just doesn't seem like a 12-year-old would be talking like this, but I really don't know. I guess that's not true anymore. What do I know? I'm not 12. Why the hell not? Thomas exclaimed. You're asking about my private life. What I do with my free time is my own business, Jordan said. If it bothers you when I bring women home, you may voice your opinion, and we'll discuss it. Otherwise, I expect you to respect my privacy. Well, what I do with my free time is my own business, too, Thomas responded, and he slid the penthouse beneath his stack of school books. Ballsy. This kid's ballsy. Ballsy teenager over here. Thomas, Jordan said, his voice terrifyingly soft. Give it back. Thomas stood up. Make me, he said. So he must be like an older teenager then. Surely a 12-year-old wouldn't be acting like this. Actually, I really don't know because I was a hellion at 12. So, maybe not. I'm going to have to go back and find out how old this kid is because it's bothering me now. All right. Make me, he said. They squared off, tension thickening in the air, their differences punctuated by the applause of the studio audience on the television. Suddenly, Thomas grabbed the magazine from beneath his books and dashed towards his bedroom. This kid's making a run for it. He said, I don't give a shit what you say, Dad. Bye. Peace. Get back here, Jordan roared, striding in the direction of Thomas's room, only to hear the door slam and the lock twist. He was standing in the hall, considering breaking down the door on principle, when the doorbell rang. Selena. She would be coming over to discuss the Hart case, which actually might be the best thing for all concerned parties right now. Jordan walked to the front door and opened it, surprised to find an unfamiliar man in a uniform. "Telegram," he said, taking the envelope. Jordan walked back inside. "Getting married December 25th. Stop. Would like Thomas to be there. Stop. Plane ticket to Paris being sent to your office. Stop. Thanks, Jordan. Stop. Deborah." Is that what a telegram is? I don't know. Is that how that works? I'm going to have to look this up. How does a telegram work? Because, like, what? A telegraph is a communication system that sends messages called telegrams over long distances by transmitting electrical signals through a circuit. A pencil on the bottom of the lever records the code. What? I'm gonna see what this looks like. A pencil on the bottom of the lever records the code on a moving paper tape. The code is usually Morse code, which uses dots and lines to represent letters. For example, a short contact is a dot and a longer contact is a line. What does this look like? Is this book that old? What does a telegraph look like? You guys, you got... What? This is a telegraph. What does a telegraph message look like? Well, what's with the stop thing? Like... Okay, well now we know what that is. So I guess that's just part of the message, like, that's like where it breaks. That's the break in the message to like say, okay, that's the end of this part of the message. This is the next part of the message kind of thing. Who knew? Not me. I didn't know. But we didn't have that shit. No, I didn't ever use that one of them things. Like, no. If y'all have ever used a telegraph in your life, let me know in the comments and try to explain it to me a little bit better. So help me out here. Help us all out here if you know what it is and how it works. All right. "Telegram," he said, man at the door. Back to the man at the door. And Jordan and Thomas. Okay. Taking the envelope, Jordan walked back inside. "Getting married December 25th. Would like Thomas to be there. Plane ticket to Paris being sent to your office. Thanks, Jordan. Deborah." He glanced in the direction of Thomas's closed bedroom door and thought, as he had 1,000 times before, that timing was everything. "Let me guess," Selena said a few minutes later when she came into the house and found Jordan sprawled miserably on the couch. Emily came back to life and pointed a finger at your client. Jordan levered himself on an elbow and swung his feet off the edge so that Selena could sit down. "No, nothing like that." He passed the telegram to Selena and waited for her to read it. "I didn't even know your wife was alive, much less dating someone." Ex-wife. "I knew she was alive. Or rather, my accountant did." "Got to send that alimony somewhere." He sighed and sat up. The hell of it is, Thomas and I just had a fight." "You two never fight." "Well, there's a first time for everything," Jordan scowled. "And now he gets to run off with the other parent." "In Paris," Selena added, glancing around. "I've got to tell you, Jordan, you can't compete with the left bank." "Thanks a lot," he grumbled. She's referencing Paris, in case anybody else didn't know. "You can't compete with the left bank." "Thanks a lot," he grumbled. Selena patted his knee. "It'll all work out," she predicted. "Well, what makes you so sure?" She glanced at him, surprised. "Why? Because that's your forte." She unloaded a stack of small notebooks and set them on the coffee table beside Thomas's school binders. "Are we going to brood tonight or talk about the case? Not that I mind either one," she hastily added. No, the case," Jordan said. "Get my mind off Thomas." He walked into the dining room, returning with a high stack of papers. "What are you doing for Christmas?" "Going to my sister's," Selena said, looking up. "Sorry." She waited for Jordan to sit down next to her again. "Okay," she said. "I'll show you mine if you show me yours." Jordan laughed. What did you get from Michael Gold?" Selena flipped through her notebook. "I think he's going to help us." reluctantly. "You can use him to bring up how little time Emily spent with her parents, cast doubt on how well he knew his own daughter." Jordan's mind flashed back to Thomas, hiding his penthouse. How long had it been there? With Jordan away and working and lacking the time to find it. Selena was still talking about Michael Gold. "While he won't tell a jury that Chris didn't do it, I think you can get him to admit that Chris loved Emily." Jordan said, looking over her notes. And we can mention that Michael's been to visit Chris in jail." "He has?" Jordan smiled. "You must have triggered something in him." "The only other thing I've got is Emily's art teacher, who has no verbal mention of but a whopper of a convincing painting." She told Jordan about Emily's self-portrait. "I'll have to think about that. Who could we get to interpret the difference in styles? It's not like we're talking about a real artist." "You'd be surprised," Selena said. She shucked off her shoes. "What have you got?" "Well, Jordan, what have you got?" "Well," Jordan said, "Emily was 11 weeks pregnant." "What?" Just in case you forgot, Selena is Jordan's assistant. Jordan is Chris's attorney. So they're discussing the case together and like what they've found, their findings, because, Selena's been going out and doing like her own investigative type things, trying to like figure out the best defense for Chris. And so she comes over to Jordan's home because they're working together again. And now they are discussing what both of them have together, trying to continue to build this defense for Chris. So, well, Jordan said Emily was 11 weeks pregnant. "What? That's exactly what Chris said," Jordan murmured, before he passed out. He looked at Selena. "I've seen a lot of liars over the years. Hell, I've made a career out of consorting with them. But either this kid is the best one I've ever met, or he really did not know about that baby." Selena's mind was racing. "That's the prosecution's motive," she calculated aloud. "He knew and was trying to eliminate the whole problem. Add college into the mix, and you too can be S. Barrett Delaney," Jordan mocked. "Well then, it's simple. All we have to do is offer a two-pronged defense. We get proof that Emily was suicidal. And we get proof that Chris did not know about the baby." "Easier said than done," Jordan reminded her. "Just because he didn't tell someone doesn't mean that he didn't know." "I'll go back and talk to Michael Gold," Selena said. "I'll go back and talk to Michael Gold, who again is Emily's father." Selena said, "And there was something the art teacher said about Emily wanting to go study abroad or attend a school of fine arts. Maybe she was the one who didn't want the baby." "Seems a bit extreme as a method of abortion," Jordan said. "No, it's the pressure, don't you see? Emily's the perfectionist. And all of a sudden her plans had a wrench thrown into them. She wasn't going to live up to what everyone expected her to be, so she herself. End of story." "Very nice. Too bad you're not the jury foreman. Too bad you're not the jury foreman. Can it?" Selena said pleasantly. "Did her regular doctor know about the pregnancy?" "Apparently not," Jordan said. "It's not in the medical files that the prosecution handed over." Selena began writing in her notepad. "We can try Wellspring and Planned Parenthood," she said. "Maybe have to subpoena the records, but I'll see if I can find someone willing to talk. The other thing I want to do is try to plant doubt about who brought the gun. Maybe put James Hart on the stand and ask if Emily ever had access to the gun cabinet. If she knew where the key was, Get the jury off on another tangent. Oh, and I'm meeting with Chris's English teacher. Scuttlebutt. Scuttlebutt has it that she thinks he's the second coming. Scuttlebutt has it that she thinks he's the second coming." She paused for breath and looked up to find Jordan staring at her, a faint smile dancing at the edge of his mouth. "What?" she demanded. "Nothing," Jordan said, looking away. He clapped his hand over his collar, as if he could tamp down the blush creeping up his neck. "Nothing at all." It was highly unlikely that any medical professional would be willing to talk to the defense team's investigator without being formally subpoenaed. Still, the rules at the clinic set up for free prenatal testing and care were slightly different. Although the records were sealed, the walls had ears. People talked in clinics and cried, and other people heard them. Selena had tried Wellspring first, without making a dent in the hatchet-faced receptionist. Then she gathered up her reserve at a nearby coffee bar and optimistically headed toward Planned Parenthood, located 2 towns over from Bainbridge. It was on the bus line. Emily, who did not have her own vehicle, would have been able to get there without much difficulty. The office was small and lemon yellow, located inside a converted colonial. The receptionist here had high, teased hair the same color as the walls, and eyebrows that were painted on. "May I help you?" she asked. "Yes," Selena said, handing her a card. "I wonder if I might be able to speak with the director." "I'm sorry, she's not here now." "May I ask what this is in reference to?" "I'm working with the defense in a case involving the alleged murder of Emily Gold. It's possible that she was a patient here recently, and I'd like to speak to someone who examined her." The receptionist looked at the card. "I'll give this to the director," she said, "but I can save you some trouble. She'll tell you have to subpoena a request for the records, if they're here." "Marvelous," Selena said, baring her teeth. "Thanks for your help." She watched the receptionist turn toward a ringing phone and walked back to the waiting room. A counselor holding a chart looked at her as she shrugged on her coat. As she walked out the door, the woman was escorting a heavily pregnant woman into the inner sanctum. Selena slid into her car and turned over the ignition. "Goddamn," she said, slamming her hand on the steering wheel so hard it honked. The last thing she really wanted was to subpoena the records, because that meant the state would be present too, and God only knew what Planned Parenthood would have to say. For all Selena knew, Emily Gold had come in crying that the baby was some other guy's and that Chris had threatened to kill her. She jolted as there was a sharp rap on the window. Rolling it down, Selena focused herself face to face with the counselor from inside. "I heard you in there," Selena nodded. Could I come in? It's cold." Selena noticed that the woman was still wearing her short, smocked nurse's uniform. "Be my guest," she said, sliding over to the open passenger door. "My name is Stephanie Newell," the counselor said. "I was working the day Emily Gold came in here." She took a deep breath. And Selena began to pray. Very, very hard. "The only reason I even remember that name is because I've been reading about her in the papers so much. She came a few times. At first she was talking abortion, but then she got scared and kept putting it off. There are counselors here. You know that the women all have to talk to counselors." Selena nodded. "Well, I was the one who talked to Emily. And when I asked about the father of the baby, she said that he was out of the picture." "Out of the picture?" Those were the words she used? Stephanie nodded. "I tried to get her to elaborate, but she wouldn't. Every time I asked her if he lived out of state, or if he even knew about the baby, she just said she hadn't told him yet. As counselors, we're trained to help clients see all the options, but not to force them to change their minds. Emily cried a lot, and mostly I just listened." She fidgeted in the seat. "Then I started reading in the papers about this boy who'd killed Emily because of the baby, and I thought that didn't seem right, because he didn't even know she was pregnant." "Is it possible that you convinced Emily to tell him? Maybe after one of your visits?" "It's possible," Stephanie said. "But every time I saw Emily, she said the same thing, that she hadn't told the father, and didn't want to. And the last time I saw her was the day she died. And we're going to end this episode of reading 17 of our book club series, The Pact, right there. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope that you enjoyed the video and the discussion. I'm so happy to be back. I'm sorry that it took me so long, but I had to do my best to heal. And it was really hard to, again, it was hard to get past the fear of like coming back to something that I started at such a very traumatic time in my life is when I started this book club. So the thought of coming back to it was, for some reason, had all that anxiety like attached to it. Thank you for listening. I hope that you enjoyed today's reading and discussion, and I hope that you'll come back and hang out with me in the next video. I love you so much. Goodbye.
How y'all feel out there?
I'm light years, call me eons. When the snare kick in, the beat is neon. Lights, yeah, I'm feeling magnificent. Care less what I'm up against.